Hello, and welcome to a Purpose-Driven Marriage podcast. We are Dwayne and Nadine Stewart, and we love any and all things marriage. You've tuned into the right place if you're looking for actionable, practical tips to help you overcome real-life obstacles common to real relationships. We're here to help you strive for a marriage as God has designed it and not as the world has defined it. Because why settle for a good marriage when you can have a great one?
All right, Nadine. So it's the end of the year, isn't it?
It is. I think that the topic that we're talking about today is perfect for end of year, beginning of new year. And that's the importance of reminiscing.
Yeah.
Right? How reflecting on our journey together, our relationship actually strengthens our marriage.
Yeah. A lot of times at the end of the year, we think about all the things that happened throughout the year. January of 2024 seems so long ago. Right?
So long.
12 months does go by pretty quickly. But at the same time, there's a lot that happens. I mean, you grow a lot. You have a lot of different experiences. And as a couple, it's really important for us to think back on some of the good things that may have happened, some of the things that may have been challenging. How did we grow from all of that? And also, when you reminisce on good times, it helps you to just remember the joy that you have within your relationship, because sometimes things get a little sour. Sometimes things get a little rough, and it's great to remember those good things because it brings you back to why you're married in the first place.
Yeah, and you were saying earlier before we hit record that you think reminiscing is actually very underrated.
Yeah, no doubt. I do think so, because, I mean, even I don't think we do it enough. To be honest with you, I think that there's not just talking about this year or even last year. I'm talking about like 15 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Those were all good times. And I think it is good to remember those things because as a couple, we go through a lot. Yes. Life starts to happen, and all of a sudden you end up like in this stale place sometimes, I think. Yes. And going back and remembering some of the good times, not like times aren't good now, but sometimes remembering some of the times that brought you joy back in the day helps you to think back to, wow, like, how did we feel during that time? Well, we were young, we were excited, and starting to almost revive some of those feelings and bringing those back, because sometimes it brings the fire back to whatever your purpose is. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's actually a lot of truth to that. In my practice, whenever couples are at a place where they just seem so hopeless in their relationship, one of the activities I do with them is have them reminisce, have them remember back to how they started. In fact, that's actually one of the methods of therapy that Dr. John Gottman teaches. When I first meet with couples, that first session, right, they come in, they tell me, well, we're here for these reasons, and this is what we need help with. Yeah. And we talk through those things. But then about halfway through our session, I have them take me back to the very beginning, how they met. And when they first get there, and many times the couples are feeling kind of anxious. Many people have never done this type of thing. Yeah. And they're sitting there not really knowing where to go. And they're looking at me like, what do we do? What do we say? Right. And sometimes they've got a list of their complaints about the relationship, about their spouse. And this is why we're here. This is how we've been hurting. This is what's been going on in our marriage. And so they have that negative feeling. And then after we're done talking through that, I have them take me back to the very beginning and tell me like how they met. Yeah. What was that like? Where were they? And it's amazing, babe. You see the transformation oftentimes in their faces, where you'll have one of them start giggling and they're like, oh yeah, I remember that party that we met at. Your friend introduced me to whomever, but I didn't want to be with them because I thought you were so cute, or whatever it might have been, right? And so you see, like, they physically change. Yeah. And all of a sudden they're remembering back to when it all began. Yeah. And so I tell people oftentimes that rather than giving up on the relationship, practice going back to the very beginning and see if there's anything that can be rekindled.
Right.
If any of those memories.
I think what it does is it kind of presses the reset button.
It does.
It's like, oh, I think we lose sight of why we end up loving each other in the first place.
Oh, yes.
And it's like, okay, oh man, don't you remember this? Don't you remember that? And you start thinking about, oh man, you know what? I loved it when you did this. And I was attracted to, or the first thing that I noticed about you was your generosity or whatever it was. And it helps you to kind of refocus your attention and your efforts in your mind towards the good things.
Yes.
That your spouse may have done, even though there's a lot of other bad things that might be going on. It's like, okay, there are some good things. I love that piece of you, and I know it's still there.
Yeah.
But I'm not thinking about that because I'm thinking about all this other stuff that I don't like, right?
Yep.
So I love that exercise. That's really good.
Yeah. It helps you to remember who you fell in love with rather than the person that you might be upset with right now. It helps you to remember the person that they were and the person that they still are, but maybe life has happened.
Yeah.
Like life does that to all of us, right?
It's a distraction.
What is?
I mean, life.
Life is. but we're living it.
I know, but what I'm saying is we can bring this back to spirituality. So you can respond to negative situations in two ways.
Okay.
Right? You can say, okay, yep, life is going to happen. Life is going to bring us challenging situations. It is how we respond to these challenging situations that's going to help us to either grow from it or it's going to break us apart.
Yeah.
Which way do we decide to go?
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's all about. But the enemy will try to get us to focus on the negative portion of it and the separation of ideas and thoughts. And it almost makes us, instead of focusing and facing each other, it makes us turn our backs towards each other and walking away from each other, right?
Yeah.
And also away from Christ. And that's what we end up focusing on sometimes during those negative situations, instead of uniting, growing through some of the challenges, working through it together, and also focusing on Christ in order to help us to bond and just grow in love towards each other.
Yeah, well, I think what you were saying earlier was so key, because someone listening to this would say, yeah, Dwayne, but sometimes it's not just one aspect of life, but it is like one thing after another, after another, after another. I mean, like you and I are sitting here as we record this, just in full transparency. You and I both know that our hearts are heavy because of just recent deaths that we heard about, recent family breakups and divorces and things like that we literally just heard about today and yesterday. And so our hearts are heavy. So when you take all the stuff that has happened all year already, you look at what's happening in the world, you look at the news, you look at what may be happening within families, and then just the heaviness of that, you can't help but sometimes feel like, man, I don't have anything else in me to be able to focus. The capacity to focus on the good, because sometimes it's just easier to wallow in the bad. So this reminiscing exercise being a reset button, as you're saying, I think is a perfect way to describe it, because it doesn't take work to reminisce, right? It doesn't take work, because this is information that's already in our minds. It's in our mental database. All we need to do is make the time. And that's it.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Like, we don't have to put forth effort. We don't even have to plan a date night. We could just be sitting there in bed and just talking about, hey, remember college?
Yeah.
Right?
Let's see if I can remember that. I mean, in the 1900s?
Yep. All right. In the late 1900s. So anyways, research has shown that couples that make the practice or take the time to practice reminiscing with each other actually have higher levels of satisfaction in their marriage.
Yep, I believe that.
Right? But I want to know why.
Yeah.
Well, why is it that those couples who reminisce together report higher levels of satisfaction?
Well, I think in general, it seems as though when you reminisce about your relationship, it's not a memory that you're recalling on your own. It's a memory that you're recalling together.
Yes.
Right? So whether it is a joyous memory, like when you first met or when you got married or your first baby, or it could be someone getting sick within your family. Maybe it's an injury that you had. Maybe it's losing a job, whatever. The whole point is that you did it together.
Yes.
And you got through it together.
Yes.
And you can look, even though it was, so we'll talk about the negative one, it might not have felt great during that period of time. You now remember how you grew from it.
Yeah.
and how your relationship is better now from that situation. And you can say, wow, you know what? We went through that.
Yeah, well,
It was all right.
that creates intimacy.
That's right.
Right. And anything that creates intimacy creates connection. And when you're connected, you can't help but be more satisfied in your relationship.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so studies show that those shared positive experiences and shared positive memories enhance marital satisfaction and emotional intimacy. But as you stated, even the negative ones, because you are overcoming it together,
Right.
is also positive.
Yeah.
But you know, the other thing that's been found, so when we're talking about why is it that couples who reminisce together report higher levels of satisfaction, is there are also other studies that report that your ability to reminisce and the act of reminiscing together can actually protect you against depression and loneliness. And this is whether you're doing it as a couple, which is what we're trying to promote, or you're doing it on your own.
Right.
We're just reminiscing again, right? Because it helps with our identity. Being able to remember who we were
Yeah.
at one point in time helps us to remember who we are
Now.
especially as a couple, right? And so that improvement of self-identity helps to protect against depression and loneliness.
Yeah, because honestly, I don't know. I don't know if we ever really think too much about how much we've all grown over years. You know what I mean? And so you think about just this year and where we were in the very beginning of the year, you know, regarding our family and careers and all those different things. Thinking back to 10 years ago, where were we 10 years ago? And you start to think about, wow, you know what? We've grown since then. We've gone through all these different things. And we can honestly say that through all of that, we've grown in maturity. You know, we've grown in our spiritual relationship. We've grown in our personal relationship, and we've learned a lot. And now we're able to kind of speak on that and say, oh, shoot, you know, it is awesome to really feel like we are realizing our purpose in life, not just individually, but as a couple.
I think that's awesome, babe. You know, for many people, that translates into identifying your why. And so when we spend time reminiscing, and when we can do that as a couple, it helps to strengthen our resilience,
Yeah.
especially in tough times.
Yeah.
Right. You know, at the end of the year, that's always when people are like, oh my gosh, like bring on the next year, please. Like, let me be done with this year.
I mean, how many people reminisce? I don't know if it's fondly on 2020 during COVID. I mean, goodness, we can now look at it and say, oh, all right, well, those are probably some of the toughest times that anybody has gone through, and the entire world went through it together. But we can also say that we got through it. And at least in our relationship, we can say that we grew from it. We learned how to live together. All the time. You know what I mean?
All the time.
It's like, well, I'm going to work. No, I'm about to walk from my bedroom to the office, which is about 15 feet. I'll see you in a little bit. And so, yeah, we learned a lot how to interact.
Yeah, but you know
more
what?
frequently together.
It boosts our ability to be grateful. Like, you know, we can practice gratitude when we're reminiscing.
Yeah.
Because we know what we came from. We know what we were able to overcome together.
Yeah.
Right? Because in many cases, we've been able to overcome a lot of hard times.
Yeah.
But we've also been able to enjoy a lot, like many more good times. And so to be able to reflect on that and be grateful for it, it's really healthy because, as you know, practicing gratitude regularly is a really healthy exercise for the individual, but also as a couple.
Yeah.
Right?
Because when you're feeling grateful about something, you're not feeling negative.
Exactly.
At the same time, those things don't exist together. If we're having feelings of gratefulness towards each other, and we're having feelings of just joy about our relationship, then we're not necessarily looking for the negative things, or the one negative thing or the two negative things don't really affect you as much because you're overwhelmed with understanding that this relationship is stronger than just one little thing that might bug you.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, we go to Google all the time for things. And so one common Google searches is the question, how do couples reminisce? Right? How do they do it? And so if we were going to make recommendations for effective ways that couples can do that, like, what are some of those things?
Yeah. I mean, the other day we were just talking about, and we don't talk about this one as often, but we were just talking about our first child And we're talking about how, during the whole period of our first pregnancy together and just the anxiety of not really knowing how to be a parent and how this whole thing was going to go. And then as our child grew in your stomach, we were just kind of like in awe and at all the different milestones that were going on during that time. It was fun to remember because now our kids are 24 all the way down to 16. So this is like a quarter century ago. But it's really fun to kind of think back to that because now we'll have kids that have kids and we'll have grandkids eventually and we'll have friends that are just starting their whole journey and we can kind of share those joys with them as well.
Yeah, and how many times in a year do we talk about our origin story? Like how we first met. In fact, actually, the other night, our kids had friends over, and one of the friends came up to me and asked, "How did you and Mr. Stewart meet?"
Yeah.
And so I went into our psychology, our Psych 105 class, and how it all began in college, and being able to reminisce about that. And that's a story that not only do we tell other people, but you and I talk about it.
We talk about it often. So everybody, if you haven't talked about it, if maybe you've thought about it, but if you haven't really reminisced together as a couple, use that opportunity today.
Like, the in the beginning story?
In the beginning, there was the word. In the beginning, how did you meet? Like, what were you thinking? What was going on with each one of you individually during that period of time before you locked eyes on each other and it was love at first sight? You know what I mean?
Well, for some people it wasn't.
I know. I'm just joking.
For some people it was many sights.
I know. But for you, I know it was love at first sight.
For me?
Yes.
Towards you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
She wants to deny it. But.
Yes, it was love at first sight. But, going through photo albums, I know our kids love it when we go through photo albums with them and we tell them, oh, this is what was happening at that time. But you and I don't think we do that often enough, to be honest.
Do people keep photo albums anymore?
I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
I think they just have things on their phone or on their computer.
No, but we have because we're from way back in the day.
We're in-betweeners, right? Because we had photo albums from high school, college, and when we got married and in those early days. Yeah. And after that, it was basically just everything was digital.
But those photo albums, like our wedding album.
Yeah.
Right? We can go back.
I love going through that. Oh, my goodness.
I know. But you and I should do that more often, I think. And then I remember turning all of our VHS tapes into CDs.
DVDs.
Or DVDs, sorry. Oh, gosh, we're aging ourselves.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we changed all of our VHS tapes to DVDs, including of our wedding.
That's right. So we go through. We've done the wedding video a few times. We go through pictures, not videos. I don't think we have too many videos of our honeymoon, but we just have pictures of just the early days when it was just one child. But even going back even further, yearbooks, going through those are always kind of fun to see old pictures of you and all of your friends and old pictures and things like that. And pictures of college roommates and all those guys that we used to hang with all the time. Those are fun memories.
Yeah, and it's not even needing to go way back, but sometimes just reminiscing about this year.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe setting aside some time to either go on a date or just lay there in bed on the couch one evening, kids are in bed, and just asking each other questions like, what's a moment from this year that made you feel especially connected? Right? Yeah. Or what was the hardest thing that you think we had to go through this past year?
Yeah.
Asking each other those types of questions. What is it that you think was our greatest challenge and what was our greatest success?
Yeah. How did we overcome
this past year? How did we overcome it? Right? How did you feel about that? How do you think that made us closer as a couple? How did we grow?
That was my next. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. How did we grow from that experience?
Right.
Right. And so those are conversations that you guys can have and just allow it to go where it's going to go. Just start asking the questions and then just sit back and kind of reminisce together.
Yeah. And your conversation will grow from there. I mean, there's all kinds of things that's going to pop up in your mind that you hadn't really even thought about for a little bit. But just starting with those questions will lead to the deeper conversation. And really, it'll just foster some of those memories that you really need because it really sets you up for whatever you're going to do in this next year. Because it'll give you confidence, number one, that, okay, if we went through this challenge last year, we can definitely do it if it does come up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, wow, you're thinking about some of the good things that may have happened and the joys that you experienced and the ways that you overcome challenges and the ways that you grew. Then you're like, okay, all right. And how many ways are we going to be able to do that next year?
Yeah. And you know how we're always encouraging people to set goals for next year and the future? It's actually a great idea to start an annual tradition where you reflect on this past year.
Yeah.
I mean, we do that in business. We spend time reflecting on what went well, what didn't go well, our successes, our highs and our lows. And that helps us to set realistic goals for the following year. But, having that end of year reflection ritual, I think would be a great tradition to start if people aren't doing it already.
Yep, I agree.
And, they could do the same thing that we encourage when they set goals. In fact, they could even do it the same day. Right at the same time. Reflect
That's probably the best thing to do, or the best way to approach it is maybe the night before you start reflecting on all the things that happened throughout that last year. And then maybe you had goals last year.
Yeah.
You go through all of your goals and kind of assess those things. Like, did we accomplish that? Did we accomplish this? Okay, maybe not so much here. How can we take all of these things and then transition that towards what our goals are going to be for next year?
I think that's perfect. And here's this one is a pro tip. So pro that you and I don't even do it.
Yeah.
But I know someone who does, and they shared it with me. So this couple that I know, they actually share a journal together, and they write in it throughout the year, just a couple's reflection journal. And so at the end of the year, they go through and they read it together. They agree not to read it all year, so they're not looking back.
So they write it down individually.
They write it down individually. So they just kind of go back and forth with writing in the journal. They write it down individually, and then at the end of the year,
or 2 books?
It's one book. It's one book. It's a shared journal. They write in it throughout the year. It's not necessarily a daily thing, but they write in it when they can.
Yeah.
And sometimes they even write little love notes to each other in there. It's a gratitude journal as much as it is an experience journal. And so at the end of the year, they open it up and they read from it.
Yeah.
And they read about what went on that year, like how they felt in different moments, the things that made them so grateful for their spouse, something that made them so appreciate their spouse. And they're reading each other's words.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. It probably brings up things that you most likely forgot.
Oh, yeah.
throughout the year.
Totally. Totally. I'm not remembering things that I was thankful for you in April.
I'll write it down. I'll write it down for you.
You'll write it down for me. I was amazing in April. So remember how great I was. Exactly. But those are some ideas for how you can make the time to reminisce, right? How you can make the time to do this really very underrated practice, setting aside time at the end of each year. Maybe it's before you guys set your goals together as a couple, and just talk about the highs and the lows, the best moments for the year, the most challenging moments of the year. What'd you learn about yourself? What'd you learn about each other? What'd you learn about your marriage? How have you grown as a couple?
Yeah.
And just talk about that before you guys set your goals. So that's one way to do it. Or it doesn't even have to be an end of year reflection, but maybe it's just whenever you're listening to this. It could be the middle of the year and you've got some time together at night. Just start talking about how far you guys have come as a couple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? From the time you guys first met, the time you started dating to where you are now, just talk about that.
Yeah. So what would you say are some of the challenge with trying to get this done? Like the process of going through self and couples reflection and reminiscing, because I think it's more of an intentional thing, right? You have to be intentional about it. And sometimes you just feel just busy. Sometimes you feel so like overwhelmed and busy that you can't really even focus too much on remembering. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't have time. I don't really have the capacity to even think about remembering. I got to focus on like cooking today. Or I got these bills to pay or whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but like, what are the challenges that we have to overcome? What are the things
Well,
that are in
that's
our way?
number one. You just said it. It's, we're too busy. That is literally the number one thing that people will say. When are we going to find time to do this?
Yeah.
Right? Like we barely have enough time for ourselves. We barely have enough time to go on a date. When are we going to do this?
Yeah.
And so that's the number one thing. But then the other thing is in many relationships, there is one person that will hear this and be like, oh my gosh, yes, that's amazing. We have to reflect. We have to reminisce. I can't wait to tell my spouse all about how I felt about this.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other spouse that's sitting there like, we have to talk.
Yeah. Like, I don't feel like doing that.
That's a lot of work. You want me to think.
It's like, now I gotta sit here and remember. Like, what if I can't remember anything? Is that gonna look bad on me or whatever?
Yeah. Or for some people, they might think it's cheesy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They might think, oh my gosh, really? Like we've got real stuff happening in the world.
Yeah.
We have real problems that we have to deal with. And now we're supposed to sit and talk about when we first started dating or, what I loved about you this year, whatever it might be. So it could be that, right?
Yeah.
Some people might be reluctant because they think it's too lovey-dovey.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a reflection on you because I keep thinking about that too. I'm like, well, maybe you're not romantic enough. Maybe you need to dig into that a little bit. But also, what about like the negative ones overshadowing? Because we talked about that a little bit. It's like, okay, some of the negative memories overshadowing the positive memories. Yeah. And I think the way to overcome that is understanding how you grew from those negative things.
Yes.
Like, how did you overcome those negative things? Because obviously you're not still in it. You're out of it now. So you can look back and say, okay, wow, that was tough. But here's some good things that came from it. Yes, it was a thing that we probably don't want to experience again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, God puts these things in our life for a reason, to show our character, to show how we can come together as a couple and be a team. And then we come out of it and we come out of it better.
Yeah. For many people, when you go through some really hard things, going back and talking through that again after you've already overcome it, it can be really, really challenging. Like you can't help but have a little PTSD and not want to go back there because the memories bring up the emotions. Yeah. Right. And many of the emotions might be really painful. And so I would encourage couples to still talk through it and focus on the things that you have to be grateful for, how you overcame it. And then actually you could use that as an opportunity to reframe the events that happened, right? So it doesn't have the same negative impact on you the second time around, right? And so you can focus on the success. You could focus on how you overcame it because you're here now. You're here today. You're no longer living through that moment.
Yes. So what you're saying is like a negative event, you can actually focus on the positive things that happen through that negative event that helps you really view that event as, we all know it's a negative, but it's actually a positive because once we came out of it, we were much, much better.
Yeah. I mean, haven't you ever had anyone say, well, did you die?
Yeah.
No, you didn't.
My cousin says that all the time.
So you're here, you're okay, you're alive, right? You're taking your next breath. Yeah. That was hard, but you overcame it.
Amen.
And so let's focus on that fact and let's reframe, that memory, that event. Like talk through it and see how you grew from it, see how much closer you guys are, how much more resilient you are as a result of being able to overcome that. And then in looking at it from a biblical standpoint, being able to see God's hands in the event and seeing how in hard times and in good times, God's there.
If I'm glad you brought up the biblical portion of it, because that reminds me of, you remember when Joshua was taking the Israelites through the Jordan, and just like, the Lord split the Red Sea, he dried up the Jordan River so that the Israelites could cross over on dry land. And he asked all the different tribes to take a stone And he told them to put on the shoulder. I was thinking a little stone, but I was like, if you put it on your shoulder, those are big stones. So he asked all the tribes, so 12 stones, to be taken so that they can remember that moment when they were able to cross on dry land. But it wasn't really for them. It was for their children, so that when their children see the stone, they can say, what is a stone for? And then so their parents and their grandparents can bring back those memories of when those events happened, so that the children that did not experience it would now be able to reflect on what the Lord has done for not just their grandparents and their parents, but for them, even though they didn't experience it themselves. So in some ways, we can do the same thing for our children. Understanding all the joys that we've gone through, all the challenges that we've gone through as a couple, and equally the challenges that we've experienced will help our kids understand that marriage is not perfect, right? It's ups and downs, but what's most important is that you and I do it together. So if they understand that there's going to be hard times, there's going to be great times, but regardless of all that, it's all good. Because if you have your mind focused on the Lord and you have your mind focused on each other while you're going through those things, you're going to be in good shape because you'll make it through, right? And so it's our job to help them to understand that and to have a transparent relationship, I think, so that they can really see and understand what relationships are all about.
I don't think we could end this any better than that, babe.
Okay.
I think that was perfect.
Yeah.
And so here's what we'll do. We encourage you guys to take the time to reminisce.
Yeah.
Like maybe set aside some time this week. It doesn't have to be a big production. If you can go on a date, go on a date.
Do it.
But if you can't and you really just have an hour at home, maybe before bed, maybe go to bed early or go to your bedroom early, but don't go to sleep yet.
Don't turn on the TV. Maybe have some music on.
have a playlist, right? A romantic playlist, or maybe one from the time that you're reminiscing about.
Not one that makes you cry, but just ones that make you feel good. It's a little slower.
Yeah, exactly. Slow jams. No, but take some time this week, if you can, just to start talking about, start with whatever's the easiest, right? So if it's reminiscing or reflecting back on this year, on this past year, do that. Talk about the things that you overcame as a couple. Talk about the things that were challenging, things that were great, how you guys grew together, how whatever it is that you guys went through this year made you better connected.
Yeah.
And even just the things that maybe you realized that you each need to work on, right? Or if you want to go way back and start with your origin story or maybe something in between, whatever it is, just take some time to reminisce because I promise you, it helps to connect you, right? It will help you to remember your why. It will help you remember your purpose as a couple.
Yeah.
So that's what we encourage you to do. Guys, if you haven't had a chance to do so and you're enjoying this podcast, please take the time to give us a review.
Comment.
Yes, and send us comments, send us emails, whatever it might be. Let us know how you guys are spending that time reminiscing. Like any pro tips, like that couple that told me about their journaling that they do together.
We can learn too. I want to hear some of the ways that you guys do it too. That's awesome.
I learned so much, especially from our social media followers.
Yeah.
They send me messages of things that they do all the time, and I absolutely love it. I learned so much from them. So we'd love to hear from you. Comment, give us a review, and take some time to reminisce this week. All right, we'll see you guys next week.